Hello and welcome to Crucible of Paint. This is the process I use to batch paint this squad of 10 Lord of the Rings Warriors of the Dead. The paint scheme loosely references costumes worn in the movies before the special effects are applied. I'm having it fade to be ghostly towards their feet, and I'm referencing the images from Weta Workshop's website. For the priming and undercoat, I've sprayed the figures black. I've then highlighted the lower third of the figures and sprayed zenithal highlight focusing on the top third and faces with white. Originally I'd planned to add swamp and grass to the bases, hence having not filled or cleaned up the slaughter base. So here I'm using a cheap art texture paste to fill and smooth out the bases. If you're going to use a texture paste for this kind of application, make sure you've tested it to ensure that it won't shrink as it dries. Step 1 of this paint job is using Hexwraith Flame I've watered down about 1 to 1. I'm brushing towards the bottom of the figure with each stroke to where I want the most concentrated colour to be. If you've already done some basing before painting, you want to get this colour around the feet of the model on the base. Hexwraith Flame again, same 1 to 1 ratio of water to paint. This time only painting down from about halfway up the already green section. Only painting towards the bottom of the miniature again to build up the colour. If you're painting the base at the same time, add this second coat around the feet again. It's time to start work on the rest of the figure. I'm done with the ethereal sections for now, so using watered down Gawthor Brown, about 3 parts water to 1 part paint, I'm painting all the cloth, armour and weapons, essentially all the figure apart from the skin. I'm avoiding painting into the transition from green to undercoat, but a little bit's fine. Now I'm doing a quick layer of watered down 3 to 1 Nylon Oxide onto the cloth and armour areas. I'm leaving a little bit of the Gawthor Brown showing at the bottom near the transition to Hexwraith Flame. Now, I'm painting over almost all the cloth that I just painted brown. I'm using watered down corn red, about 2 parts water to 1 part paint. I'm leaving a thin amount of brown at the bottom towards the transition. A bit more or less won't make too much of a difference here, as long as the paint is thin enough. I'm keeping in mind that I'm batch painting troops here, not painting characters. Using Mephiston Red, slightly thinned with water, about 1 part water to 2 parts paint, I'm adding a first highlight to all the red areas previous layers of brown and red have run off of. This was a pretty good indication that these are raised areas. I'm highlighting the tops of the folds of the cloth, the top of the non-metallic parts of the helmet, and doing a little bit of an edge highlight to the sleeves and capes as the figure has them. Getting the cloth under some of the chest pieces was a good idea too. I get a bit too much in there now, but by doing a dark wash later, it was an easy way to clean up when batch painting. I ended up going around most of the figures twice, as the paint was drying quick enough during the first coat, just to add a little bit of a finer layer to the highest parts if the colour hadn't saturated enough. Here I'm base coating all the metallics with 1:1 water and lead belcher. I'm not worrying too much about getting total coverage on this application. The metallics will be given a rusted tarnished effect anyway, and some red brown showing through will look intentional. A quick 1:1 Nylon oil and water wash over the cloth and metallics, avoiding the hexwraith flame and its transition. With my favourite contrast paint, Snakebite Leather, I'm applying a thin layer to the wood on the shields and the shafts of the spears. Now I'm doing some highlights with thinned Evil Sun Scarlet, about 2 parts water to 1 part paint. I'm just focusing on the top of the folds of the cloth, the top of the arms is in the parts facing upwards, and the tops of the helmets, making sure that the last pass over an area finishes at the top of the section, or the section that I want the colour to be strongest at. With a 1:1 mix of Warplock Bronze and Auric Armor Gold, thinned with water about 2:1, I glaze over the chest pieces that I want to look more bronze. I'm not going for a radiant gold look here, it actually looks a lot more gold wet than it does once dried. Using Nylon Oxide, I carefully paint over the bronze sections to dull it down and give it an oxidised, tarnished appearance. Using a mixture of Evil Sun Scarlet and Rhinox Hide, about 1:1, on a fairly dry old brush, I dab over the metallic steel sections to dull the metallics and begin the rust effect. Using the same old brush again, this time with Troll Slayer Orange, I dry brush over the steel metallic sections to give them a brighter rust effect. Now, I'm doing a 1:1 Nuln Oil and Water wash over the rusted metallic areas and the wood of the shields. This brings them down in colour and mutes them in to match the rest of the figure. Finally, for the metallic sections, I give a light dry brushing of lead belcher, focusing on the top edges using an old worn layer brush to give an inconsistent dry brush. Thinning Gilliman Flesh Contrast, 2 parts with 1 part contrast medium, I paint over the faces and hands. It looks super thin on the footage, but it looks pretty convincingly ghoulish on the figures once dry. Using an old brush with some Celestra Grey, I messily highlight the eye sockets and give a quick dry brush highlight to the bottom of the green on the cloth and up into the transition of any of the figures that the transition is not looking so smooth on. Using unthinned Hex Wraith Flame, I paint into the eye sockets. I don't mind if it gets the Celestra Grey a little, or pulls in the sockets. It's a really diluted paint and will dry super thin, giving an easy glowing eye effect. Using contrast paint, Agaros Dunes, I've painted out from partway into the Hex Wraith Flame out to the rim of the base. I've really phoned in the base on these troops, as I haven't done my good army for Lord of the Rings yet. I'll update these to match the bases of my army when they get done. I'll have the Hex Wraith Flame at the feet transition out to match the base style of the army. Using 1:1 Rhinox Hide and water, I'm layering over the edge of the contrast paint out to the rim of the base for smooth coverage. Again, this will eventually be redone to match an army. as I always like to do, I'm cleaning up the rim of the base. I like doing mine black, so I've thinned Abaddon black with a little bit of Nylon oil for smooth flow and to get a nice cover for the base rim. I'm doing 2 thin coats at least, followed by a cheap art satin varnish to protect them from greasy fingers. And here's the final outcome. I'm pretty happy with the effect for the effort that I put in. I hope you got some ideas or enjoyment from this, and happy batch painting.